Okay, you come sit here. Yeah, I wouldn't have ये बैग नीचे रख दो ये बैग ले लो Doctor, come there next to Harish. We just start in a minute. We're going live, so we can one of the panelists couldn't make it. He's in Mumbai, so he'll join us from there. Is he online? Huh? Is there? No, but yeah, there. Yeah.
Yes, sir, I'm online.
Okay, fine. Okay. He can see us. You can see us also.
Yes, sir.
Okay,
Okay.
fine. Okay. Good evening to all of you, fellow members of IIC, ladies and gentlemen, and the India International Center. Welcome to the seminar on keys to governance. We have keys to governance and social and communal harmony. We have a distinguished panel of speakers today. Professor Mary John, former professor and director, Center for Women's Development Studies. Dr. Ananya Vajpeyi, associate professor, Center for the Study of Developing Societies. Dr. Mujibur Rehman from the Center for the Study of Social Inclusion and Inclusive Policy, Jamia, Millia. And Dr. Harish Wankhede, assistant professor at the Center for Political Studies, JNU. Harish would not make it to Delhi in time, so he's going to join us. He in fact fell sick in Mumbai, so he's going to join us from Mumbai itself. And yours truly, Suhas Borker, shall moderate the discussion. For some housekeeping, the discussion is for 90 minutes. Each speaker gets 12 minutes, which takes us to about 7:30. After that, we open the discussion to a Q&A session, at the end of which each panelist gets 2 minutes for concluding remarks. We close at 8, probably 8:05 now. Okay. This is the 8th edition of the seminars on keys to governance in honor of my elder brother, who was a senior member of IIC, Shekhar Borker, banana boy on the Indian postage stamp, private sector administrator, citizens, environmentalist, and advocate of empowerment of persons with disabilities who passed away today in 2015. The earlier 7 seminars in the series Keys to Governance were on compliance and delivery 2016, political will 2017, constitution as ideology 2018, education as empowerment 2019, steel frame 2020, independence of judiciary 2021, and constitutional morality last year 2022. For the past 2 years, due to the COVID pandemic, we were on a webinar mode, but this year we have resumed the physical meeting with the technological add-on that we are webcasting this meeting live on the IIC YouTube channel, IIC Lectures, where it shall also be archived to be viewed anytime on call. Also, Harish joins us today from Mumbai, thanks to the webinar technology. Now to today's topic, social and communal harmony. From being an aberration, hate crimes are the new normal. What makes them more distinct now is how this imposition of the majoritarian Hindutva agenda is being normalized by authorities and law enforcers. And there is a very disturbing report which is coming in from across the diaspora that the polarizing anti-Muslim politics in India has begun to divide the Indian diaspora on communal lines. Recent reports from South Africa suggest that a country where Gandhiji brought all castes, religions, and all linguistic communities together in their fight for basic rights have now been divided, and they of course unitedly participated subsequently in the ANC's anti-apartheid struggle. So this divisiveness is going right across into our diaspora. The brief of our discussion today is as follows. There are some questions which have been raised. Why decline of secularism could be irreversible and could cause massive disruption in future governance? Can India, the most diverse country in the world, stay united without communal harmony? How should Indians maintain communal harmony and social cohesion when faced with a continuous barrage of hatred and misinformation? What are the resources of social and communal violence for questions of gender and gender violence. Given the political economy of the Indian media, does it not have an inbuilt prejudice towards the marginalized communities? And given the power of the media, is not social harmony an utopian concept? Now I would like Dr. Mujibur Rehman. Mujib, if you can begin. Yeah. No, yeah. Press the key. Oh, sorry. Sorry. There's a little ritual we have to do. Sorry. Sorry. As per protocol, we have to present these Angavastrams to the speakers. So I'm sorry, this is left out. So can we? Yeah. And then just take it. So, Mujib, can you, sorry for this. Yeah, Mujib, please.
Good evening to everyone, and I'm immensely thankful to Mr. Borker for this invitation on a subject that's almost a taboo these days to talk about in this country. My first instinct is it's about communalism or something of that kind. But as many of you understand, would agree with me that there is no communalism that exists in our country. What exists is nationalism, or those who are opposed to nationalism. So therefore, it's very courageous on the part of Mr. Borker to kind of put together a panel on this particular subject. So I'll try to respect the time and try to wind it up before 12 minutes so that my other distinguished panelists who are going to shed light on different dimensions of this particular theme would deliberate on this. I'd like to preface my presentation with some comments, which is that this particular question, keys to governance, social and communal harmony, the relationship between the two is so obvious and it should be accepted as a universal truth. The fact that this is not accepted as a universal truth and is debated and discussed, that itself raises a question with respect to the kind of time that we all live in. It is obvious that you require some degree of harmony, or rather a great degree of harmony, for any kind of governance where rule of law, where everyone is treated as equal, is the guiding principle. But we are increasingly living in a society where rule of law or law is not equal for everybody. There are certain communities for whom the law is different as opposed to other communities. So in our society today, if there are a bunch of rapists who are getting released prior to their term, that is treated as normal. People in power are silent with respect to that. If there is a gang rape case of an 8-year-old, as it was the case with Kathua rape victim, there are lawmakers who ask this question: why are you raising this question? Or lynching, on which Honorable Supreme Court of India has already given a judgment asking the government to form a separate law, and there is no response from the government, from the ruling party on this particular issue. No respect to this particular judgment. This is not just the ruling party, but also the opposition parties are equally quiet. This is a non-issue in important elections that has been taking place in our country ever since, whether it was 2019 or Uttar Pradesh or Gujarat or Himachal Pradesh. This issue remains a non-issue. So lynching is not considered, and that it's very likely that will remain a non-issue in Karnataka. There are occasions when I've asked lawmakers about this, that why is it that you in opposition party who claim to be interested in secular politics, claim to stand for minority rights, are not mobilizing or raising voice, or at least writing later to the Home Minister, asking that why don't you promulgate a law or come out with a bill on this? How should we describe it? Students of political theory would probably fall back on the famous phrase of Hannah Arendt, banality of evil, and as if it exists in various parts of our country more actively than anything else. This obviously takes us to the second question or second concern, which is the place of violence in a society. What has happened to it in last few years? Is this something that is an aberration or a continuum of Indian society and Indian history? I would personally prefer to look at it as something which is part of some kind of a continuum. Even if we all have this big argument or the moral high ground that we as a society, as a country, launched an anti-colonial movement that primarily claimed to be non-violent. All the major sources of violence, whether it is caste or religion or patriarchy, they in different shapes and forms have contributed to the kind of violence that we witness today. What majoritarianism has done is that it has given its own spin to the various forms of violence that has emanated from these sources. Paul Brass, a very distinguished political scientist, while commenting on the violence, particularly on Gandhi's choice of non-violence, argued that one of the reasons why Gandhi opted for non-violence as a method, because he was able to sense that Indian society has enormous amount of potential for violence. So if he chooses violence as a method, then that would kind of trigger endless cycle of violence in society. That is what it argued in his book, Politics Since Independence, published from Cambridge University Press. There are other scholars in recent years have addressed similar questions, one by Shruti Kapila in her book, Violent Fraternity. This takes us to the bigger question, which is, what is the big picture? And how should we make sense of all these developments in our country? My sense is this: there are two ways that scholars would try to look at it. One way scholars look at it by looking at it, India as a competitive liberal polity where various political parties, including BJP, were trying to compete for power. And another way of looking at it, with which I feel more comfortable, that India is in the middle of an ideological power struggle. To understand this, one has to review the history of 100 years, go back to 1920s, to make sense of what is unfolding in India today. If you go back to 1920s, you see there are three dominant forms of ideologies who are competing with each other and working in British India. They were united in one particular goal and worked in tandem for that particular goal, which is to kick out Britishers from India and make India free. But each of those ideological forces have their own vision once Britishers depart. You have secular forces led by Congress, left, and others, socialists and others, who wanted that people of different religious communities could live together as united under the banner of United India. You have Muslim League, which wanted a separate country for Muslims because it believed that Hindu Muslims cannot live together. Then you have Hindu Right, which believed that it is primarily a Hindu country and it should restore its own glory and build a Hindu Rashtra. Out of these three forces, the first two became reasonably successful by late 1940s. The Hindu Right was a marginal force. The first two, the Muslim League was able to create a separate Pakistan, and the secular forces were able to put together a constitution which primarily gave rights to people of all faiths as equal. They laid down the primary framework of politics. Over the last 70 years, it is the Hindu Right that operated according to the framework that was laid by secularists, maneuvered and outsmarted, and has emerged as the hegemonic force of Indian politics. Even if they swear by the constitution, it is apparent that a lot of things that's been done in this country are not consistent with what constitution stands for. Therefore, I always say that there is only one person who is very honest about what Hindu Right stands for, is one of the former lawmaker called Wankhede. He once made a statement: we are not here to follow the constitution, we are here to change it. I will, so this, one of the foundational ideology on which Indian constitution is based on is basically secularism. And there are, of course, academic debate about what kind of secularism is this, whether it is Indian and non-Indian, all that stuff about it. But from the point of view of majoritarian politics, the way that it has unfolded, the Hindu Right made a conscious effort to delegitimize each and every category of ideologies and value system that secular politics was interested in instituting in India. So it obviously questioned secularism. It has presented secularism whenever there was an attempt to do anything concerning secularism, it looked at it and presented it as appeasement politics. It was perceived and it was shown, and by its own propaganda was presented as something which is primarily a Muslim project. So it is presented as vote bank politics. But in the first couple of decades, somehow or other, it appeared that as if secularism is an established ideology. So scholars like Susanna Rudolph, if you read her book In Pursuit of Lakshmi, she writes in late 80s that there is a consensus around secularism in India. But it is at the same time one comes across the explosion and arrival of Ayodhya movement and the explosion of or disintegration of secular politics of India. So around 1980s, when BJP comes into existence, it recognizes the influence and acceptability of secular ideology. So it does not question secularism as such. What it questions is this, the implementation of secularism by secular political parties, whether Congress or Samajwadi or left or DMK, whoever ruled whichever part of India. It argued that whatever secularism these people practice, it's primarily appeasement. It argued that this is negative secularism. We also believe in secularism, but we would like to implement something which is a positive secularism. That is how the distinction was made from late 80s, 90s till the early part of 20th century. Now those two words have disappeared from the conversation of BJP or Hindu right. Nobody today talks about positive secularism or negative secularism. Because on the one hand, it is understood that those who believe in universal human values, that social and communal harmony are a prerequisite for governance. But there are people in power who probably are convinced that this is not required. What is required is some degree of social disharmony, some degree of communal disharmony. Even with that, governance project could be advanced. And that is what is the foundation of the majoritarian politics. And that is what popularly been discussed and argued as politics of polarization. So whatever we have seen in the name of politics of polarization in various parts of our country is not something that is either an aberration or something that has, that is in fact, is a very deliberate political strategy. So now this politics of polarization, I will now conclude, has taken different shapes and forms. Say, in the context of Muslims, for instance, there is this newfound compassion for Pasmanda Muslims by Hindu right. So for years, secularists have looked at Hindu right as deeply prejudiced towards Muslims. And now there has been repeated statements that has come up from the top leadership of the BJP saying that we are deeply concerned about the backwardness of Pasmanda community, which is part of the backward Indian Muslims. Now, the question is that one does not see any comprehensive formulation about how to uplift the so-called, address the so-called backwardness of Pasmanda Muslims, which roughly constitutes a majority of Indian Muslims. Because majority of Indian Muslims, it is understood, are from Hindu heritage. And coming from Hindu heritage, it is seen that some great mistake that these people have done, and they need to come back to the Hindu fold in some way or other. But the question is that if you look at Islam, which is the youngest of Abrahamic religion, the history of Muslims all over the world essentially is from non-Islamic heritage. So Muslims in Arab and the West come from Judeo-Christian traditions. It is not that there were Muslims who straightway came and became Muslims as such. So therefore, this is not something which is an aberration. This is a normal pattern of Muslim identity's evolutionary history, that Muslims became Muslims at some point of time for whatever reasons. For instance, in South, if you read works of Suzanne Belli and others, it is the Sufi tradition that played a major role in the spread of Islam. And that's one of the reasons why Periyar made this appeal, in 1943, addressing anti-Dravida conference that untouchables should join, Dravidians should join Islam and abandon Hinduism. So this is another effort that secularists have argued, a divide and rule policy that the Hindu right is interested in employing in perpetuating another version of politics of polarization in society. So I'd like to conclude with this, and then we can carry on the further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mujib, for putting the the cards so disarmingly on the table. And I think you have answered the question which you raised about is secularism irreversible? I mean, the decline of secularism, is it irreversible? And of course, you also mentioned the newfound love for the Pasmanda community of the right, which also is in a way quite disturbing, because this newfound love. Anyway, so we request Harish to now, please.
I would like to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Borker and the other organizers for asking me to be part of this panel on keys to governance, social and communal harmony. I must confess, though, that a major reason to be here is to learn from this panel as to how indeed, and from all of you, how indeed a notion like harmony, whether social or communal, could be our guide in the times that we live in. Harmony is such a tricky idea, precisely because it is so attractive in and of itself. Dictionary definitions range from its place in music to the philosophies of Aristotle and Confucius. Social harmony connotes accord, agreement, balance, and alignment between people and between groups. In the Indian context, and we've heard a great deal about that just now, it is communal harmony that has been particularly powerful. Religious harmony calls forth descriptions of love and affection between those who identify with different religious faiths. And when I went online, and I think this is a good place to go sometimes, I was struck by the kinds of examples that Google provided quite readily, probably taken from recent news items. And here's an interesting list. Muslims set up langar for protesting Sikh farmers. Members of the Khalsa Aid provided food and refreshments to farmers protesting in Punjab. The Sikh community sanitized the Jama Masjid ahead of Eid. Muslims formed a human chain in front of a temple during Bengaluru violence. The other of harmony is discord, conflict, violence. Notably, all the examples given above are of acts undertaken by members of one religious community towards another, acts of care and protection against a backdrop of protest and violence. However, the principal agent in times of communal violence is not a particular religious groups or particular members within it, but the state. It is not accidental and fits in very well with our discussion under keys to governance that the Ministry of Home Affairs has frequently issued guidelines on communal harmony. In 2008, such guidelines were disseminated to the chief ministers of state governments who are tasked with the prevention and the control of communal disturbances and riots in the name of the maintenance of communal harmony. These guidelines are quite extraordinary in their reach. Preventive measures that include detailed profiling of districts, the role of the police in interfacing with community leaders and the wider public, with the requisite manpower, weaponry, and technology, the setting up of administrative committees, plans for monitoring and crisis management, which include peace committees in localities with adequate representation of women, the filling up of posts with requisite representation of all groups, including scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and the list goes on. This is not the place for a lengthy discussion of the role of the state in context of communal violence. How often have we been disturbed by the lack of decisive action on the part of state governments to bring riots to a swift end? I would like to use the time available to me to briefly dwell on a recent case of murder that was front page news for days on end. It seemed to epitomize the vilest form of violence by a Muslim on a Hindu. And yet when the state government in question stepped forward to respond to the issue in the larger interests of social harmony, women's organizations protested their proposals. I have found this case so disturbing precisely because the kind of publicity it was given prevented it from being contextualized in the manner that is so sorely needed. It is not accidental, in my view, that this was a gender issue. We are not well placed in our understanding of gendered violence in contemporary India, and this also makes me quite unclear when it comes to attempt to think about what harmony would mean in relation to gender. The case in question was the murder of 26-year-old Shraddha Walkar, allegedly at the hands of her live-in partner, after Poonawalla in November last year, whose horrifying aspects hogged the headlines. It was a magnet for police investigation, but also for news coverage. This makes it even more important for those of us who are concerned to think about what the issues are, what is a women's situation in such a context. However gruesome and even bizarre this case might seem, there have been similar cases in the past. In the so-called Tandoor case in 1995, Sushil Sharma murdered Naina Sani, his wife, cut up her body and hid the body parts in a tandoor. No one identified him as a Hindu or as a Brahmin. The focus was on his being a youth Congress leader and the damage it was doing to his party. Contrast that with how the media picked up the present case, making so much out of the identities of the accused and the victim. Whereas Sushil Sharma could be without caste and religious markers, casteless as it were, in the current highly communalized atmosphere, some religious identities, Muslims in particular, are not allowed anonymity. Not only was anonymity unthinkable, in the hands of many, including reported statements by the Maharashtra Chief Minister, this was alleged to be a case of love jihad, which taken literally would mean waging religious war through love. It must be remembered that the ideology that is gaining ground now, that is communalizing the atmosphere so pervasively about Muslims, and again, we've heard about this, about their population growth, feeding irrational Hindu fears about becoming a minority in their own country. These have been simmering since over a century. Love jihad is a recent addition to this brew of claims that do not need to have any factual basis. Even though evidence has been given proving the falsity of such claims, this has not prevented their deliberate circulation in the current political climate. Yet another chief minister, this time from the state of Assam, reportedly said that there will be an aftab in every city unless there is a powerful leader. Did anyone warn against a Sushil Sharma and a Tandoor case in every city? But the greatest tragedy is that this incident became a way to defend arranged marriage and the Indian family system. There was much online commentary about listening to your parents, and the union minister no less blamed live-in relationships for such crimes. So let us take the minister's advice and take a moment to look closely at Indian marriages and families. To start with, consider official government data on crimes against women brought out every year by the National Crimes Records Bureau. These are based on recorded crimes in police stations and are therefore undercounting what may actually be happening on the ground. Under crimes against women in 2020, as in previous years, by far the highest numbers of crimes that are recorded are under Section 498A, which is cruelty by husband and relatives. Now, husbands and relatives is everybody's definition of a women's family in India. This would make the Indian family responsible for the highest rates of crimes against women according to officially lodged FIRs. This outstrips by far recorded rapes and even cases of sexual harassment. However, dominant social ideas tell us that families are spaces of safety and that the greatest danger lurks from strangers in public spaces, especially if they are from the wrong class, caste, or community. But in reality, the most dangerous spaces for women are in their marital homes. These cases are happening in the most conventional arranged marriages, where women did indeed listen to their parents and elders. Moreover, such cases are increasing. Every day, the inside pages of newspapers record cases of wives being attacked, dowry being demanded, and so on. These cases are considered routine and not worthy of further attention. So to those who think that the traditional Indian family is the solution to all problems, my response is to say, please do take a careful look at the Indian family. Why do our families show such high rates of abuse and cruelty? The other data that desperately needs more attention, is barely discussed, is suicide. In the early years of their marriage, far too many wives are pushed into taking their own lives. In most states, the official rates are higher than rates of farmer suicides, but have received no public attention. While farmer suicides have been examined as a sign of an agricultural and rural crisis, nothing similar has happened in the case of these wives. In this context, live-in relationships should not be treated as anomalies or as something wrong requiring correction, especially when they involve an intercaste or intercommunity relationship. According to reports in this particular case, Shraddha and Aftab did not have the support of their families. Rather than having more freedom in such a relationship, most women are placed in an even more vulnerable position. This is why most women end up bargaining for a kind of marriage-like structure, hoping to rely on familial the support when things go wrong. In a living relationship, women are taking the risk of choosing companionship, love, and care from a particular partner, while being invariably denied any of the other support that is supposed to come with marriage. Why do women stay in bad relationships and not leave? This was also another question that was asked in this particular case. Freedom autonomy ought to mean that they are free to enter or exit from self-choice relationships. In order for this to be possible, there has to be some freedom and autonomy at economic level of one's own livelihood. The media was full of the nature of the relationship, the abuse, all the forensic horror and fascination of what happened to the victim and to her body afterwards. But what information did the media give us about Shraddha's life, her work? Did she even have a job? Who took care of the household? What does it take for someone to be able to be in a position of real, sustainable choice? It requires economic, social, and sexual autonomy, and at the same time, it also requires the presence of people and institutions one can depend on in times of need. It is only when all these dimensions are taken care of that a space is created within which a person can negotiate relationships in their life. As you can see, trying to provide a perspective on this terrible case seems to have taken me towards notions that are somewhat different, though not incompatible with notions of harmony. Meanwhile, in the wake of this case, the government of Maharashtra has set up a panel named Interfaith Marriage Family Coordination Committee at the state level. It is to be headed by the Women and Child Development Minister. Initially, the panel was to probe both intercaste and interreligious marriages, but the government resolution was amended quickly due to opposition from various political parties and organizations, as Maharashtra has a policy, and this is interesting, of encouraging intercaste marriages. So the word intercaste was dropped, and now the panel will only probe interreligious marriages. The panel will collect information about such marriages through the Registrar's Office and stamp duty offices, and not only marriages registered under the Special Marriages Act, but those performed in temples or other informal forums would also be scrutinized. Even live-in relationships would come under the scanner. There has been opposition to this move from women's organizations, among others. The Stree Mukti Andolan Sampark Samiti, along with many other women's organizations, criticized the government for such a resolution, which facilitates the collection of detailed information about couples who are in interfaith marriages and information of the women's maternal families. This is not an act of the state to support love across communities, but to police them. It is a far cry from the anti-caste movements, whether those of Periyar or Ambedkar, that believed in creating new bonds of respect and kinship across castes, so that intermarriage could be a way to breach hostilities and inequalities between castes. For those of us struggling in an atmosphere of communalism and casteism, love, marriage, and family life continue to be amongst the most potent and successful for deepening conflict rather than providing the seeds of something akin to harmony. I have suggested that the violence within the so-called domestic sphere needs our attention as much as any public riot. We need to provide more substantive content to a form of harmony that could be the genuine other of violence in such contexts. The fact that one of the principal origins of harmony lies in the world of music is not helpful here. If you stop to think about it, the awe-inspiring harmony of a symphony orchestra, and I love symphony orchestras, don't mistake me, is bound by the strictest of rules and leaves no room for choice or negotiation. But this is not to diminish the urgency of what is required. More young people today are aspiring to lead this country than ever before. Of course, the desire for better opportunities elsewhere is hardly anything new. But I'm disturbed by the new ingredients in their rationalizations that I hear these days. They say that they do not want to bring up their children here, not just because of the physical or atmospheric pollution of our cities, but also because of the pollution and brutalization of our shared culture that is producing a climate where hatred and fear towards others is being normalized. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary, for bringing certain critical issues on the table. And of course, gender and gendered violence. And then also we should not overlook violence at home when we talk about public violence. And then, of course, the brutalization of the shared culture and heritage that you mentioned so well. Now, can we go to Harish, please? Harish, are you there? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Right. No, thank you very much, sir. The thing is that when I wrote this particular paper, I thought that I'll be speaking almost for 20 odd minutes, but when you suggested that it cannot be extended more than 12 minutes, so I cut most of the part of my work. What I thought that, of course, to think about social harmony, when this particular idea was suggested that we need to speak about social harmony, I was just thinking that, like the earlier speaker also suggested on the same lines, that somewhere the idea of participation, engagement, or representation for that matter are crucial for whenever we think about social harmony as such. But when it comes to the socially marginalized communities, mainly the Dalits, I will find that this particular concept is almost absent. Why I'm saying it's absent, because the arena on which I'm looking forward, mainly the media, and of course within media, when we look upon cinema, we find that almost there is a complete erasure or relegation or absence of the Dalit representation or Dalit participation in that. So when there is an absence or there is a kind of almost negligent presence, the concern for social harmony doesn't make any sense. And therefore, when sir asked me to propose a question, I propose this particular question vis-a-vis media, suggesting that the idea of social harmony is almost utopian when it comes to the Dalits, mainly in the sector of media. And therefore, I thought that my major presentation will be about the largest cinema change that we are witnessing in last 20 odd years, mainly post-globalization, and the kind of a new genre that has now emerging called as the Dalit genre or Dalit cinema. Do we have a kind of welcoming attitude towards that? And through that, a kind of a concern for a larger participative social media or a cinematic media. So whether we are ready to acknowledge or accept or some kind of a welcoming gesture towards the Dalit cinema as such. And that is the major theme that I'll be taking up. Further, of course, I was listening to other participants also, and the idea that somewhere for a very, very long time, the discussion on social harmony, or even for that matter, communal harmony, is basically reside around the idea of Hindu, Muslim, or the religious identities. But when it comes to the Dalit question, or even for that matter, the Dalit tribal question, there is always an hesitation to engage with the claim of harmony as such, that the Dalits also require a sense of harmony and sense of participation. And that is very much visible when we see the earlier cinema. Like if 1950s, when it was called that it is a golden age of Hindi cinema, where films related to socialism, nationalism, and a larger Gandhian value of the nationalist cinema was very much there, we'll find that there was complete negligence of a Dalit question within the cinema. And I was trying to find an answer to that, why that when it is such a powerful medium of representation, cinema is such a powerful medium of representation, why at that part of time, the cinema makers who called themselves as a socialist at that part of time, almost neglecting the caste and the Dalit question. What can be the reason for that? Why the question of social harmony is not engaging with the caste or the Dalit question. And therefore, I thought that somewhere there is a neglect from the very beginning. It is not the recent phenomena where the representation question is now become so loud and clear, but it is from the very beginning, the idea that there is a neglect going on, and the Dalit question is not seen as the question of what you call, even for that matter, socialist harmony or coming together for a larger revolutionary class. The Dalit question is continuously been neglected. The second part, when in late 70s, when parallel cinema emerged as a very, very powerful medium to represent social reality, you'll find that people like Nilani and Benegal, they created a cinema, or even for that matter, the film that they created where the caste operation, feudal exploitation, and even gender violence was shown in a very, very realistic manner. But even in that part, you will find that somewhere 70s also the time when Dalits are mobilizing in a very, very aggressive and sincere manner, especially in the city where cinema is also making, mainly Mumbai, the arrival of Dalit Panthers for that matter. But you will find that in the parallel cinema again, the representation of Dalits is mainly about what they call their precarious conditions, that they are wretched, they are almost powerless, and they have no sense of human dignity. Most of the films like Damol or Git, you take number of films of that film, you'll almost find that they are basically outsiders and they do not have the sense of human value at all. That representation, that stereotypical representation was very much there. And why I'm bringing that particular issue? Why? Because somewhere at the same time in the same city, the Dalit Panthers are claiming in a very, very loud voice that they should be represented as human beings, as a hero, as a qualified human being, as a leader of a mobilization, or for that matter, movement. And there is a kind of rupture between the two, that the Dalits are becoming heroic, they are coming to the street, and the cinema is almost neglecting and erasing their presence in this in the field. And therefore, the sense of harmony, when again it is coming from a very important civic society arrangement, cinema is a kind of elite enterprise for a very, very long time. There has nothing to do with the governance for that matter, or the state is not directly indulged, but it's a part of the intellectual creative outfit, and therefore there was an expectation that the intellectual class or the creative class or the artist will reflect on this issue in a very sincere manner. Probably the change that has come up in a very dynamic manner is, of course, in 1990s. And that was also the time when the right wing also shifting its gear, what they call the arrival of the new BJP, where it was suggested that the BJP today is basically reflecting on the caste and the Dalit quotient in a very sincere manner, and they are basically providing legitimacy or even kind of some kind of a space to their cultural questions, and now mobilizing through multiple newer cultural strategies, mainly the lower OBCs and the lower Dalits. And through that, it was suggested that probably the cinema also saw some kind of a better change in 90s. And through that, when we see some of the films, like for that matter, in one of the articles where I mentioned that the arrival of a Dalit protagonist, which was almost absent before 1990s. And in post-1990s, you'll find that the Dalit is also seen as a heroic person, as a person who has the credentials to battle and fight and argue and ask. And for that matter, the very popular film called Arakshan, Jha's film, there again, the character by Saif Ali Khan's character is basically shown on those lines. So there was a kind of an arrival. And in the very recent time, I was suggesting that somewhere a plethora of films which are now coming up, and those films are now showcasing Dalit characters as a participants, as a kind of a very, very creative and credible and intellectual individuals. Like for that matter, Newton is one of the major film on those lines. So those are the films now which are coming in a bigger way. So let me just for a positive time, let me read one or two small incidents that I have. The new stories of urban Dalits are distinct from the stereotypical portrayal of the Dalit lives offered by the parallel cinema earlier, as I just mentioned. The new Dalit character is portrayed as an aspirational being with basic desires and dreams, like films like Manji. He is picturized as a robust claimant of dignity and an upholder of heroic credentials, film like Newton for that matter. He is now shown ready to contest the degraded social and class condition with human capabilities. Another very popular film, Subhash Kapoor's film Guddu Rangila, and can achieve his dreams or desires, like Nagaraj Manjule's recent film called Jun. Though such imagery has improvised the meaning of Dalit characters positively, the Dalit characters has not emerged parallel to the mainstream Bollywood hero. The Dalit body has to operate within the given rationale of caste society and has to perform under the dominant ethical and social codes. The possibility that Dalit body can creatively alter his social role and emerge as an alpha male hero, or even as a part of a common people, is still outside the imagination of the filmmakers. A dynamic shift is in portrayal of the Dalit character emerge once the films are produced directed themselves by the Dalits. Like for that matter, Paranjit's film Madras, Kabali, Kala, Sarpatta Parambarai, Nagaraj Manjule's film Fandri, Sairat, Jund, or Neeraj Ghaiwan's film Masan, or Meli Selvaraj's film Karnan and Perimaram Perumal. These films have introduced a vibrant and powerful Dalit character, one that understands his deplorable social location and ready to contest it with revolutionary zeal and passion. Often, these films subvert, mock, and challenges the dominant form of cinema and provide critical reflexivity to the audience. It reintroduces the Dalit as the enlightened entertainers that can now tell their own serious stories, escaping the coercive gaze of master class and their ideological imperative, like the earlier popular cinema. The Dalit representation in cinema has improvised tremendously with the new module of Dalit genre. Like, as I said, it has been nuanced and heterogeneous, and the Dalit characters are bestowed with mainstream hero credentials, like Rajnikant's character in Kabali or Dhanush's character in Karnan. Importantly, while it sensitively showcases the dreams and desires of the marginalized communities, these films also endorse the mainstream entertainment requirements like dance, music, drama, and action. This genre thus offers possibility that the Dalit characters may emerge as a mainstream hero. Their stories can become inspirational tales, and the artists belong to the Dalit Bahudana strata may gain popular fame. It appears that the Dalit genre of cinema has now arrived prominently and can entertain the people, general people like the other counterparts, and therefore the claim for social harmony that Dalits will become part of the general audience. But the problem that I wanted to raise, like that there is a trust deficit towards the Dalit identity. Traditional cinema provides popularity to the national cultural symbols designed by the social elites. For a very long time, we witnessed the visible exclusion of Dalit bodies as mainstream artists, technicians, and characters in films. Though they are important part of the traditional entertainment practices, like in Maharashtra, what we call the tamasha, the modern cinema industry has not treated Dalit as subject of entertainment. Instead, it neglected their talent, cultural symbols, and provided no space to their social thought and political ideas. Within the mainstream entertainment space to their social thought and within the mainstream entertainment practices, the Dalit aesthetics and artistic traditions are relegated as folk and base culture of particular caste groups, and their political aspirations are treated as disturbing to the values of cultural nationalism or even for civic morals. Dalit presence on the screen creates a different cinematic experience in this case. His arrival on screen does not amuse or entertain the audience, but create anxiety, uneasiness, and disturbance. The Dalit body is not a hero material, as the credential required to perform the role of a legendary protagonist is reserved mainly for the social elite character. The mainstream hero often wears the upper caste social identity and acts as alpha male. The social elite hero can fall in love with anyone, can sing and dance, can challenge and defeat the powerful villainous class, and can even emerge as a superior agent of change. We can notice that the Dalit character is often divorced from such fundamental cinematic fiction, entitlements, and credentials for a very, very long time. Instead, in conventional cinema, the Dalit character's presence reminds the audience about his precarious, unfree, and wretched condition. Therefore, seeing a dancing Dalit hero, or the one who can defeat the mighty supervillain with his fist of fury and can emerge as a victorious legend, is an alien subject for the filmmakers and the general audience. It was acceptable norm that the Dalit character will not be entertaining the audience, but shall only be used to showcase the troubled social realities, poverty, and perpetual class struggle under which he or she survives. The Dalit character is not even presented as an ordinary person that can perform mundane social and cultural acts without any fear or prejudices. Instead, the Dalit characters are often stereotypical, a perpetual prisoner of degraded caste body that cannot escape the gaze of the social elites. The new films in Dalit genre, which we just talked about, challenges the conventional order. It has witnessed commercial success and has celebrated as a fine artistic expression like Sairat or even for that matter Kabali. However, this film too castigates the Dalit character in a particular caste location, disallowing them to play the role of an abstract free individual. This is the major claim. The protagonist's actions are determined by his caste subjectivity, and he is not free even to perform as a normal average person. The way Hollywood has presented the Black characters and the stories as the growing part of the popular mainstream culture that includes offering them roles of superheroes and saviors of the universe, like Black Panthers. Such possibilities are distant in the case of Dalits in Bollywood cinema. Though the Dalit filmmakers and new characters have created their niche space in industry, they are far away from becoming the mainstream entertainers of the people, and therefore the impossibility of the social harmony. Because of their caste identity, their artistic talent will be scrutinized with critical apprehensions and will not be allowed to become the representative voice of the entertainment business. Let me stop it here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harish. I think you have very succinctly put forward that the trust deficit for the Dalit identity. Thank you very much. And now we go to Ananya, please.
Thank you, Suhas, for inviting me to speak here today. And to all the previous speakers for their remarks. I've always seen myself as a product, a proponent, practitioner of a certain default understanding of Indian secularism. Whether in terms of marriage or in terms of my inheritance, my parentage, my friends, my colleagues, the kind of life that I've lived over the last 50 years in this country. To me, interreligious, intercaste, any kind of miscegenated and a border crossing web of relationships and interactions and experiences constitute the basic truth of Indian life. And this is something that until very recently I didn't think was possible to remove in any sense or dislodge in any sense from a kind of common sense of what it means to be Indian and live as an Indian. I just want to recount to you 3 or 4 recent experiences. And don't worry, they're not awful experiences about the breakdown of social consensus or the replacement of communal harmony with discord, quite the opposite. On August 15th, last year, I was invited by a school in Kerala to address their students. Now, this is a school for differently abled, mentally and physically challenged children in a place called Kochi, which Ashish Nandi has written so beautifully about. And I thought it challenging to address such a vulnerable group, but vulnerable in such a particular way. And of course, parents and teachers and families and volunteers and everyone who makes the school, who populates the school and who makes the school run. It's a very old and very respected institution in Kochi. And I thought to myself, what could I possibly have to say on August 15 on Independence Day? It was also, of course, the big Independence Day in terms of being the 75th year and so on. And I have never in my life, this is probably not something I should say in public, but I honestly have never felt a true sense of patriotic pride in this country, not only on Independence Day, but on any occasion, as I did on that particular day, whilst standing in the middle of this community of people who had dedicated their days and nights to giving these children an opportunity, they came from every religious community. In fact, I think the majority of them were non-Hindus. They were Muslims, they were Christians. The school was located in a Muslim neighborhood where they had their building. Most of the members of the faculty, the members of the board, etc., were Christian. Everybody turned up in orange and green and white saris and clothing. The children all wore white. They had rehearsed for weeks and weeks. And despite all their disabilities, whether mental or physical, they had dressed up as freedom fighters. There was a Mahatma Gandhi, there was a Maulana Azad, there was a Nehru, there was a Sarojini Naidu. Everybody sang the national anthem. And I felt almost, I mean, I was so moved and I was so deeply sort of humbled by this experience that I almost felt as though, I had no right to give anybody a speech here. I had nothing to teach these people. They knew how to be Indians better than any message that could be given by any, visitor or guest or invitee from Delhi or for whatever reason I had been invited. I felt that I did not have the authority to speak to these people because they practiced what they preached and they lived everything that is enshrined in the Constitution and all of the values, whatever those children's disabilities, at some level they understood the freedom movement, they understood the nationalist struggle, they understood the idea of India better than any of us professors and intellectuals, and however it is that we take great pride in the kind of understanding of that we have, our analysis of this society, our knowledge of its history and so on. But we know nothing in the way that these people were absolutely on home ground, in a sense. And there was no self-consciousness there. That's what I found so admirable and awe-inspiring. In fact, there was no self-consciousness about the fact that they had all shown up on a holiday to celebrate Independence Day in this particular manner. Right around Christmas, I was traveling in Bengal. I was in Calcutta and in Shantiniketan. And again, I was absolutely thrilled to see how enthusiastic everybody seemed to be in Calcutta about Christmas. Now, I know this as a, as somebody who's written about Bengali culture, who's written about Bengali literature, about Bengali life, who has many Bengali friends. I know that Calcutta Christmas is a very special thing. I always celebrate Christmas with Ashish Nandi. He is from Calcutta and he is a Christian. And I usually spend Christmas with him. But yet again, I mean, showing up there in this time of year and just seeing the whole city lit up and it was very warm and there were these completely ridiculous decorations everywhere with Christmas trees and depictions of snow and all these other kinds of things. It didn't seem to me that anybody had any problem with enjoying Christmas. And I don't think that had to do with what religion people belong to personally. I mean, I don't think very many of these people were Christians, but that still didn't change the fact that the restaurants were completely full to bursting, the museums were full to bursting, the Victoria Memorial, the Maidan, Park Street, people were just out there and they were enjoying the spirit of Christmas. And then came the new year. I was back in Delhi and I was remembering New Year's Eve on December 31st, 2019, which I spent in Shaheen Bagh, which was subsequently, I mean, it was at that time, it was the place to be if you wanted to be part of any kind of political conversation and movement, in a sense, in this country. And everyone I know turned up at Shaheen Bagh that night, whether we had come on previous evenings or not. And it was absolutely jam-packed. The main body of people present there were these Muslim women from that area, from that part of Delhi, which is a largely Muslim neighborhood. And I use the word neighborhood when in reality it is a ghetto and it is treated as such by the state. It was absolutely peaceful. There were dozens of speakers from all different parts of the country, all different walks of life. There were artists, there were writers, there were singers, there were intellectuals, there were poets. What surprised me actually is that how many people wanted to be a poet that night. Everybody wanted to recite poetry in whatever their language, and however good or bad their poem was. And the audience was mainly women, mainly Muslim women. And there was no pushing and shoving, although it was incredibly crowded in a very small space. There was tea available the entire night, pretty much for everyone. There was a lot of singing, including of the national anthem and other so-called patriotic songs. And you know that Shaheen Bagh was a symbol of a kind of mass popular protest led in many instances by students all over the country against these new citizenship laws and the creation of a national register of citizens, both of which seek to fix and classify and manage our identities as Indian citizens in ways that are clearly marked for religious difference and that essentially have a majoritarian intent. And these protests were growing by the day all over the country when they were interrupted by the pandemic, and they have never again, come back in any recognizable form or fashion, because we know what happened to many of the protesters and how an example was made, especially of Muslim students from either Muslim, markedly Muslim campuses like Aligarh Muslim University and Jamia Millia University, or students from a markedly left-wing campus like the JNU. We know where many of those people ended up and where they still languish, all these years later. Now, what I want to bring to your notice here is that in the way that I was raised, and probably millions of Indians of my generation were raised, and we can make kind of caveats for class and for privilege and all these kinds of things for education. But even so, I would say, I think I do represent a kind of default understanding. And I would never be uncomfortable in these kinds of situations, whether it was Shaheen Bagh, whether it was, Calcutta during Christmas time, or whether it was, Kochi on August 15, as a tightly integrated and explicitly diverse community that has a long history of that diversity from the time that Jews, Muslims, and Christians first came to the Kerala coast and came to India. And what troubles me today is that these instances stand out to me as these oases of relief and of a momentary return to the faith that it's still normal. It's still real India out there, and that not everything is given over to this language of hatred and discord that Mujib was talking about when he said, our assumption is that the premise for good governance, the key to good governance, is social harmony, is a broad consensus, is that secular consensus that that Mujib mentioned, is the sort of miscegenated family that is a reality in every family. You will find people who are sexual minorities, who are whose ancestors probably converted, probably intermarried, probably married not in ways that perpetuate the endogamy or that cross religious lines and so on. You'd find this truth in every family, and you would think that in order to govern a nation of this kind and expect to maintain any kind of law and order, especially in a democratic framework, that the state and the administration would be invested in keeping the peace. You would think that. But as Mujib was correctly saying in the very beginning, no, there's a new kind of politics today which seeks to keep society on the boil, which seeks to polarize discourse and to alienate people from one another, even their neighbors, even their relatives, even their teachers, even their students, and so on and so forth. Now, the question is this just a perception? Is this just propaganda? Would they have us believe that this is the way we are going? Or is this how people are now actually thinking? And my feeling often is that when you step out of a place like Delhi, which is pretty toxic in the kind of political discourse you find here, you once again come back to real India. And in real India, people know how to live with difference. And people know that each one of us belongs in some sense or other to a minority. And that any one of us can at any moment be considered marginal based on the kinds of choices we make or the circumstances that may befall us, quite outside our control. So people have a respect for their own vulnerability, and that makes them be generous, be hospitable, be accepting of difference in others. This is what we were taught to believe is what it means to be Indian. And it's hard for us to accept, I think, that such a massive kind of set of such a mosaic, such a vast mosaic of communities, such a massive set of small and big compromises and adjustments that go into making this country exist from day to day over the last 75 years or over the last 7,500 years, whatever it is, that can be overturned and that can be forgotten and that can be repudiated. And that you can prove that it has been repudiated because of a certain kind of electoral majority or a certain kind of election outcome. It's hard to buy that. We think that we can't refute the numbers, but then maybe we're not thinking about numbers in the correct fashion. That's the only conclusion that I'm slowly coming to. And I'll close now by telling you one more story of a panel very much like this that I was invited to speak at again just before the pandemic in the summer of 2019. It was hosted by, it's an annual event hosted by a famous Hindi magazine. And it's always on at the end of July on the Hindi writer Premchand's anniversary. And out of respect for the magazine and for the platform, all the speakers decided to speak in Hindi, whether we are Hindi speakers or not, or whatever. There was a Sikh journalist, very prominent Sikh journalist, editor, There was a Muslim jurist and legal scholar and legal expert. There was a scholar and a professor of Hindi, who of course is a Hindi speaker, but his real expertise, for which he's well known, is on Kabir and everything that Kabir stands for. There was me, and there was one representative, so-called, also a scholar, also a professor, in fact, oddly at JNU, where he sticks out like a sore thumb, but he's a representative of the Hindu right. And he was invited for that reason, that, it shouldn't look like we are preaching to the choir, and it shouldn't look like everybody on the panel is secular, and so on and so forth. And guess what? He's the only one who spoke in English. And he said, I mean, frankly, and he was the last one to speak, and we all, spoke one after the other. We had prepared our speeches. And the question was, the question of the nation, I'm just translating what the topic was, the question of the nation and the problem of identity. Okay, it was very generally worded, but basically the idea was to talk about the polarization of religious identities and the discourse of nationalism, which had reached such a fever pitch. This is right after the 2019 election. And, this man got up and first of all, he had not prepared anything. Then he opened up his computer. It's this old hall in Old Delhi where, you could barely get, the lights to work, leave aside to have Wi-Fi or whatever. Then he said, oh, I can't find my document. Then he said, I grew up in Maharashtra, I can't speak Hindi. I went to St. Stephen's College, I can't speak Hindi. And then he said, all of you secular people, your day is over. It doesn't matter what you say. Our time has come. He said this, and people in the audience got up and left the hall when he started speaking. They got up and they left the hall when he started speaking. And he said, it doesn't matter, you can leave the hall. You don't want to listen to me. You don't want to hear what I have to say. But guess what? It's my time now. It's not these people's time. And he waffled for a bit, and he kind of made a fool of himself. And then everybody came back for the final wrap-up session. So people were like, we don't want to hear you, right? But the fact of the matter is that he exuded so much arrogance and such a feeling of superiority and such a certainty that his point of view carried the day because they had just won the election, right? Now, in a sense, he was right. I mean, we were all just sitting there in this hall and, talking to each other. But in a sense, he was also wrong because everyone in the hall got up and left when he spoke. So which of these two things am I supposed to take as more indicative of the fact of how Indians think about communalism and social harmony, and religious difference? Do we have contempt for this kind of frankly disrespectful and completely historically unjustifiable and unconstitutional, I'm sorry to say, unconstitutional, discourse of sheer communalist and majoritarian assertion? Do we have contempt for that? Or are we in a sense subject to it because we are subject to the, to the vote, which we ourselves cast? So that is the question I wanted to ask. And I wanted to, I gave Suhas that question, that is it actually possible to govern a country like India, which Ram Gua called it the most diverse country in the world. And I think he's right about that. Is it actually possible to govern a country like this without being invested in some form of a social consensus? And when your entire strategy is to tear apart the social fabric and to make enemies out of fellow citizens and to demonize and exclude minorities, if that is your strategy, how do you expect to govern this country? And isn't it time that we come back to our own wisdom, however we've expressed that? We obviously don't express it very successfully through our voting. But is there some other way that we can express that wisdom, and that lived reality of interreligious, intercaste? And, I'm not saying conflict free. And I'm not saying, that inequality is not also a reality in this country, as Harish was saying. But at the same time, we have certain heuristics of how to live together and how to live with difference. And we have to find ways to express those, which rise beyond the calculations of electoral outcomes. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ananya. You've taken time enough for the fifth invisible speaker. Okay. So anyway, thank you very much for that out of box thinking. And it's we must remember there's oases of relief that you pointed out. Kochi, Calcutta at Christmas, then the Shaheen Bagh, and of course, I can identify the professor. I won't name him, but I can very well identify who you were mentioning, the guy from JNU. Anyway, so he exemplifies their arrogance, whatever. But we are in toxic Delhi, but we are also in a pluralistic cultural center. Okay, we are defending ISC for whatever it is. So we can talk all this here, because otherwise I don't know whether this how long this oasis. We'll defend it to the end, but it's Ashish is there, so it's a tough job. But anyway, thank you very much. So we'll now open quick questions. Though the idea is that if you could just come up to the podium here and identify yourself, because we are going live. Yeah, please come.
My name is Amita and I'm a Hindu, and I've always lived in Delhi, and I'm very disturbed by Dr. Mujib's depressive predicament about communal harmony, and Mr. Professor Harish's take on Dalit representation. Though as a woman, I must confess that I'm ashamed of a few things recently. I was very badly disturbed by that lynching of a family because of eating a certain kind of meat. I was really upset. And then there are cases of improper imprisonment of Muslims, young boys. Also in day-to-day life, but I have a solution for all this. I've been in education all my life and not in a very elite place. I was in a government school where my school catered to all kind of population. I had Muslims, Hindus, Christians, and all the Dalits also. And they were imparted the same kind of education. And all the teachers' attitude towards them was same, whatever it was, but there was no discrimination. And I think that the present government, as Ananya very rightly said, has issues about it, but we, the people of India, are exactly what she's portrayed. The people in Kochi, people in UP also, I'll say it's not that bad. Like in a Muslim in a UP, is wearing a sari and she speaks in the local dialect. And you can totally identify with her, and she also identifies with us. In Kochi, in the whole of Kerala, whether it's a Christian or whether it's a Muslim or a Hindu, you just cannot distinguish from their appearance, from their behavior. It's a huge, huge comfort to all of us that we are living coherently and cohesively. And there are, as far as Dalit representation is there, we are Harish ji reading so many books about from Murugan. He's an author who writes such relevant stories about the Dalit lives. Also, the movies the representation has changed completely through this OTT medium. We are seeing so many Malayalam movies and Tamil movies where the movement from Hindu to Christian to Muslim characters and the Dalit characters is so smooth that you're amazed that they don't even mention it. And similarly, like he mentioned the movie Kabali, we watched the Kabali without realizing that the protagonist was a Dalit. So what I'm trying to say is that despite the government's attempts to erode our sanity, we as a nation are still full of hope, and we use our judgment day in and day out. And this year I have traveled to Kashmir, I traveled to Ranikhet, I traveled to Kochi, the whole of Kerala, and everywhere it was as if I'm seeing myself. Everybody was an Indian. So on that note, I must say, please have faith, and times change, and they cannot, the ruling party cannot erode our views.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, please. You have to go first. Yeah, Ambassador Fabian. If somebody else can just take the walk now only. Yeah, come, it'll be faster then. Come behind him.
Thank you, Suhas. Well, let me start by complimenting you and the brilliant speakers for the choice of the theme and for their presentation. Now, I entirely agree with the last speaker from the audience, but I have something to say about every distinguished speaker, but I shall confine myself only with Professor Mujibur Rehman, who very correctly took us back to the 1920s. And you said that there were three ideologies. And then you said that the Muslim League was the only ideology that wanted a division of India. Maybe that Muslim League came out openly with the ideology of division a little later, but that's not the point. The point I want to make is that it was Lala Lajpat Rai who first publicly came out with the idea of division of India on the basis of religion, and Lala Lajpat Rai, and he correctly, uncannily correctly predicted the actual frontiers. Probably 1923-24, I can't remember now, but it's all, it's in B.R. Nanda's book. It's all documented. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. After.
Good evening. My name is Mohammed Anfaz and I'm doing PhD from Jamia in Islamia. So my question, more than question, I just want to know the take of Ananya ma'am on this. When you were speaking on Shaheen Bagh issue, you used the word ghettoization, ghetto neighborhood. So I'm just curious to know how far it would be fair to use the term ghetto, because if you see the etymology of ghetto, ghettoization is something where people are forced to live under some political, legal, and social pressure, right? And also in a homogeneous context. But as far as I can understand that the whole Jamia Nagar is a very heterogeneous community, and if we are using the word ghettoization, according to Mahmood Mamdani's recent book, Are We Buying the Nation State Vocabulary? So can we use a term mohalla, for the place like Shaheen Bagh, because Nita Karmani has written a book questioning. So according to her also, that identity formation is a process. When we use the word mohalla, we can form the identity more in a positive manner. And when you use the ghettoization, it gives certain sort of negative connotation. So I just want to know your take. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Aloni?
I'm Y.S. Salone. I teach in School of Arts and Aesthetics, JNU. Just a small comment. Well, I congratulate Suhas for organizing this such a wonderful seminar or a conference, whatever it may be. Having listened to all presentations, I have a very specific comment and a query as well. One thing is that we, as a citizen of Republic of Government of India, do we have a collective responsibility to create an idea of shared aspirations, which is enshrined in the Constitution? That is one thing. And second thing is, why is it so? I mean, blaming political party is so easy, but is it not a collective responsibility to keep check on the political parties, as well as why one should, I mean, I also feel that one should also investigate why there is a viciousness. Is viciousness inherent to certain ideological principles and the practices? And why we as a conscious citizens fail to present a critique of that vicious consciousness which is being perpetuated all the time, something like a Puranic myths or something like propagation of the Puranas in the modern day times.
You take one more, yeah. Sahu.
Yes, my name is S.N. Sahu. There was a time in India when in railway stations and in other public places, Gandhi has written about it. Vendors used to sell Hindu tea, Muslim tea, Hindu pani, Muslim pani. He has written it in his constructive program under the caption Communal Unity. And he said that when he went to jail to see the soldiers of the Indian Army in Delhi, those soldiers said, we fought for India, but in jail we are being served Hindu tea and Muslim tea. Then Gandhi said, how do you deal with it? He said, we mix half of the tea and then drink. So he said, that's a great solution. Okay, so, and this continued, this Hindu tea, Muslim tea continued in India till 1950s. Mrs. Sita Parmanand, who was a member of Rajya Sabha, mentioned this in Rajya Sabha debate. They said, so why is not the government of India trying to abolish it? The question here is, I think the solution comes from such examples from our history. In fact, Gandhi, 1946, I wrote an article on this. The more communal tensions get accentuated, that would reflect in the revision of history, and exactly that we are confronting. So here, I think people's history should be written, even at the civil society level, as a kind of a remedy for this. This is all I wanted to share with you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're just going for the, okay, last bit. Okay. We'll have to close it now. Okay, no more. Yeah. Just identify yourself.
Yeah, my name is Ganesh. I work for the BBC News Marathi. I have two questions. One is before Mujibur sir, and second is before Ananya. So how do you look at the translation of this communal narratives in the ballot boxes, and they are in the power and they will be in the power for some time? How do you look at all this phenomenon? Second, the translation of communal narratives in ballot boxes. I mean yeah. And second, madam, should we have more dialogues between secular and those who are thinking about Hindu Rashtra, So do you think that there's a there's a gap between the dialogue between secular and those who think about the Hindu Rashtra and on that line?
Okay, fine. So we just asked the panel, I think the concluding remarks can also fall in within the parameters of your comments. Okay, we'll just start off. Very short brief, huh? We're running up.
Yeah. From the point of view of this ideological, ideological forces, the broad ideological forces, and I'm not disputing. So there are different sources, but in organized sense, these are the political organizations which essentially campaign and advance the cause, and we see the competition, and what we see is a result of that. That's what I basically wanted to say. In terms of ballot boxes and communal ideology, I think there was a tremendous amount of overconfidence with which whatever has happened, I think it would be a wrong thing to argue that everything started in 2014. So the Hindu right consolidation started taking place from late 1980s and subsequently it continued. I think secular groups did not take their job as seriously as they should have taken job, and often they became collaborators and partners in the process, which is what has contributed to the expansion. So today, when Mamata Banerjee talks about it, she was once a partner. Today, Farooq Abdullah, when she talks against BJP, but once Farooq Abdullah was also a partner about it. They all gave helping hand. Nitish Kumar there are many such political forces. So we never had a clear fight between secularists and the Hindu nationalists or Hindu fundamentalists, however you describe them. So the advantage has obviously gone in favor of BJP and this about it. My own sense is this, that a lot of strategies that Hindu right has employed, they were either underestimated or were not been able to foreseen by the secularists in the process about it. So it was assumed that in the 80s and 90s that they would only be using Ayodhya variety of campaign to expand. And since India is diverse and South would not respond to it. I had a big argument with EPW editor and in his office, and he said, it's a rural country, BJP can never come to South. Then Karnataka, they took over, and they are acting very, very clearly today in the South to take over the rest about it. So similarly, the Pasmanda thing is something that was not known to a lot of people 3-4 years ago about it. It's a new strategy about it. So Hindu right has its own strategy, and it is innovating and deploying to take over India and to govern it from panchayat to prime ministers, from panchayat to prime minister's level, as Amit Shah once said about it. How do I see in the electoral point of view? The answer is that unfortunately, I do see that they are going to be successful to a large extent in their project. What has changed today in Indian democracy, which is also very important for us to underline, from the beginning, Indian party system has been lopsided. You had a dominant political party, Congress dominated for many years, many decades. Now you have BJP, which has almost replaced the Congress. But what has changed, apart from this dominance of one political party, is the fundamental game, which is that BJP has invented, which is no matter who wins the election, we will form the government. People may vote for X, Y, Z, that's okay. But you can form the government, maybe not form the government in the next 24 hours, but certainly in the next 3 months, 6 months, we will be there. So that's the story that has come out from various state governments, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, all of that about it. And that's likely to be the scene. Tomorrow, I was having this conversation with the former chief election commissioner. He was saying that we have to go around and saying that Modi is going to lose the election, and then that will kind of create the tempo for this about it. I said, I agree. You defeat Narendra Modi, how many seats? 10 seats, 30 seats, 50 seats, 10 seats, you'll form the government for 1 month, 30 seats, you'll form the government for 3 months, for 50 seats, you'll form the government for 6 months, So that's what fundamentally has changed about it, and which is a very unfortunate thing. Thank you.
Not sure I didn't get any direct questions. I will say though, I'll maybe repeat that there are forms of violence in our midst that we somehow have a harder time dealing with, and maybe that's why I didn't get any comments or questions. And why is it that these forms of violence, which are in our midst, which we actually experience in our homes, don't find expression except when they take forms like the case, when everybody then has a lot to say. On the issues around, what is happening in our society, I would like to say maybe on a more somber note that the Hindu right has been hard at work for over a century. Let us not assume it is from 2014. In neighborhoods, in groups, so Mahila Mandals now are being run by the RSS. This is what is happening on a daily basis, and I don't think groups like ours have even done that kind of work, that daily work that they have done. And in my view, what that has meant, and I think that I'm not a political theorist, but what 2014 and after has made possible, and across all classes, I have to say this, I happen to have grown up in a minority community. What this has made possible is the capacity to say things today that were not, that people, I do not believe that even when I was, growing up as a child, I do believe that my non-Christian friends had all kinds of beliefs about what Christians did or didn't do, and they aren't as benign as some of you would like to think, apart from Christmas, of course, and carols, always loved. But the difference is that they would not necessarily express those to me, but today it has become quite all right to say these loudly and clearly. And that is the difference, I think, between what happens when there is a state that is providing a kind of standard for what is normal compared to what was true before. I would suggest that we think about that. Thank you.
Yeah, Harish?
Yeah, thank you very much, sir. No, of course, there was no direct question, but of course, this suggestion that the OTT platforms and new media is, of course, giving some representation to the caste question or the Dalit question is, of course, a welcoming thing. But probably I'm not making the claim for representation also only, that there is a growing representation now, but I was making some kind of a claim about the qualification of that representation. That when you think about Dalits, what kind of anxiety you come across, and therefore probably this particular question of harmony is not a kind of very powerful concept to deal with the Dalit question. I believe that it is almost like a concept like tolerance, or even kind of a loose question about celebration, or some kind of a festivity, or some kind of cordiality in that. There is no deeper intellectual agency that required to understand the Dalit question when we think about harmony. And therefore, probably when Dalit issue is raised, I don't think that it can be resolved through the attribute of harmony in general. There is something more that one has to reflect upon when we are thinking about social relationship. And in that case, probably a substantive meaning of harmony is required, which is not available to most of us. And probably Professor Alone was absolutely concrete in suggesting the reason for that it is not only about this kind of a cordiality or this kind of a celebration, or even some kind of a temporal arrangement like Shaheen Bagh for that matter, which is just happened and gone. But there is a deeper requirement of what you call a shared aspiration between people. And on that account, probably harmony is not the term which help us to engage with each another in a very sincere and a deeper sense, in an intellectual sense, audio sense. And therefore, probably harmony has some kind of limitations. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the one question about the ghetto. I use that word advisedly, and Nida Kirmani is a good friend of mine, and she came to our center as a visiting fellow some years ago when she was still able to travel freely between India and Pakistan, when she was doing her research on Muslim communities in Delhi. And I use the word not to suggest intrinsic properties of this mohalla, But the fact that it is excluded from the urban fabric, it is marked out, and it is systematically denied various kinds of, basic municipal rights, for example. You probably don't have, good sewage, you don't have good water supply, you don't have proper electricity supply. The houses are very cramped. People of only one community tend to live there, and not necessarily by choice, but because when they try to go to find accommodation in other parts of the city, they are turned away on grounds that they are Muslims. Now, that is what I mean by ghettoization. I mean it as a form of discrimination that then forces members of a particular community to inhabit a shared space which is restricted and marked out relative to a city as big as Delhi, which is one of the biggest cities in the world, most populous cities in the world, which ought to allow you to live along some principle other than your religious identity, right? And that people are not allowed. And I don't agree with you that the community in Jamia or around Jamia, around that part of Okhla, that side of town, I don't agree with you that it's as mixed as we would want it to be, or that you might expect because of its historical evolution and so on. I think it has become more and more and more concentrated, and it's a kind of way of banishing people into a kind of state of exception by having them live only in those parts of town and not anywhere else that they would like to live, or that they could afford to live, perhaps. Anyway, we can talk about this later. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll close now. We're 20 minutes up. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mujib. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Harish. And thank you, Ananya. And thank you for being such a patient audience. The point I just want to make is that I think there's been no attempt in all these years, a concerted attempt to consolidate secular forces. I mean, I was part of the Rashtriya Ekta Abhiyan just after 1992, Ayodhya, the imbroglio. But, it all ended up in 96 by making a prime minister, and then everything was forgotten. And then the whole thing multiplied, So the 1997, another prime minister. So that, there's been no concerted, we've been so complacent, and that we have been co-opted by the Hindu right round the way. And we've lost many of our co-associates and co-workers and to the Hindu right. So I think there's been no consolidation. And I think that is the real thing which has to be done, so that it's a long battle, but I think we have to take up the battle. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.